Hi everyone, welcome back to the Communication Conflict YouTube channel promoting mindful communication, growth through conflict. So today's video is about a no blame approach. I've been contacted by an online HR magazine for an article about the idea and practice of a no blame approach and how HR teams can implement one within their organizations. So because that's the topic that I'm pondering at the moment in order to write the article, I thought I'd share some of the features of a no blame approach with you on the channel. So here we go. So first of all, let's give an example of a no blame approach being used. So let's imagine you're watching a football match, soccer for anybody from the United States, but a football match in the UK, and it's getting to the closing minutes of the match, and your team is drawing the match. It's a very important match. The opposing team striker gets through on goal and they shoot the ball, and the goalie seems to catch it, but they don't, and unfortunately they drop the ball and it goes over the line, and there's literally only seconds to go at the end of the match, and in the end your team loses. So the common response to that would be to say it's all the goalie's fault because they should have caught it, they had it in their hands, they dropped it, it went in the goal. The common response in a blame approach, and actually it's probably the more common approach anyway that's taken to a situation like that, would be a blame approach to say it was the goalie's fault that the match was lost, that the team lost because they dropped the ball. But in a good football team, in a successful football team, and you'll see this actually showing up in a lot of top level professional teams, not all, interestingly actually, but the most successful ones particularly, you'll notice that no one at any stage will blame the goalie for what happened. The manager won't, other players won't, because what they all recognise is that the actual event that happened, the goal that happened, was also created by perhaps a player further down the pitch losing the ball to another opposition player, and that player then played it through to the striker, and the striker scored the goal. If that earlier player on your team hadn't lost the ball, they wouldn't have been able to play that pass. So you could say they're to blame just as much as anybody else is. You could say that something that preceded that, like maybe a free kick was given away, which then gave the opportunity to the other side to score. You could say that a defender should have tackled the striker before he got a shot away, or she, whoever you're watching. And so there are various contributions to that end event of the goal going into the net, rather than it just be the goalie's fault because they dropped it. Because, in a sense, why did the striker have the ball in the first place? Who's to blame for that, if we're going to be blaming? And the point is that actually a successful team, and you'll notice this, is that none of them will say that the goalie's responsible. They'll all say they all have something to work on the following week, to look at, to be accountable for, because accountability is another thing that often comes up as a topic when we're talking about no blame or blame approaches. That when they go back on the training pitch the following week, they will be looking at how they can keep hold of the ball better, they'll be looking at how they can pass better, they'll be looking at how they can prevent strikers getting through the back line of defence, and of course also the goalkeeper will be looking at how they can hold on to shots better. But it won't just be the goalie who's being focused on, because they're taking a no blame approach. They're all accepting their part in the event happening, in the loss that occurred. You could also say, why didn't the strikers score more goals early on in the match if blame is going to be attributed? And the whole point is they don't attribute blame. They recognise that everything is always an opportunity to improve, to reflect on and improve. And that's the essence of a no blame approach. If you contrast that with a blame approach where maybe the goalie is blamed, of course the goalie's not going to want to take all the blame for it, because they'll point out, well, why did you let let the striker through? Why did you give the ball away further up the pitch? Why didn't you score more goals? And they'll all start arguing because each person will feel they're being put under the spotlight, being blamed as if it's just down to one person. But a good team won't do that. You'll notice if you talk to the players, and some might say, oh, well, it's only for the cameras that you see that. But actually, when you kind of look behind the scenes and you see them working together on the training pitch, they're all acknowledging that they all need to improve. They all have things to work on. So there's an acceptance that that final result of the goal being scored is everybody's responsibility and no one is at fault. So you could use the phrase all are accountable, no one is to blame. And that's a very appropriate phrase for a no blame approach. So that's the first thing I would say, is that that's the nature of a no blame approach. And in environments where that isn't practiced, it's pretty clear and pretty obviously going to become the case that people are getting at each other most of the time. It won't be a pleasant place to work. There won't be a sense of trying to always improve. There won't be a sense of fulfillment. There'll be a constant attempt to try to kind of cover up faults and mistakes that have been made, because there's this kind of strange expectation that people should be perfect and infallible, when we all know that's a ridiculous expectation. But sometimes situations are set up where somehow it expects that that's going to be the case, and so when it's not, people feel that there's some kind of problem in the situation which is down to one person, i.e. the person who made a mistake. And so effectively any team that tries to operate like that will soon break down, and it won't be an effective team. It won't be an innovative, creative team. Whereas a group or team that adopts a no blame approach will always use those mistakes, those fallibilities to learn and improve. It will be the whole point of it. It will be an environment where the focus is on saying, okay, that didn't work, so what do I need to do next time? So it's not saying it's okay to make the mistake. It's just saying it happened. Let's learn from it instead of using it as a kind of stick to beat people with. So that's the first thing I want to say about a no blame approach. So taking that sports analogy and transferring it to any team environment in the workplace or on the sports field, what are the features of a no blame approach? So the first one is to say it's looking at what happened rather than who did it. So that's a significant difference. In a blame approach, you're looking at, well, who did it? Who did the dirty deed? Who did the thing that was wrong? In a no blame approach, you're looking at what happened. It's acknowledging that anybody could have done the thing that didn't work, but that's not going to help us move forward. It's about looking at what happened in the moment, what happened in the lead up to it, and what can we learn in order to move forward and prevent the situation happening again. So in that sense, a no blame approach is also future focused and supportive of creativity and change. So it's looking at, okay, so what didn't work? What can we adjust so that it does work in the future? What aspects of this aren't working at all? What can we create that will be better for the future? A blame approach, when it's inappropriately applied, there are situations where a blame approach is the correct approach, and I'll come to those in a little bit. But in a blame approach, the focus is on who did it, and so people kind of get locked into a defense attack kind of approach, pointing the finger of blame at each other. Like earlier, the goalkeeper, what I was saying about the match, the goalkeeper will be saying it's the defender's fault or the midfielder's fault, and other people will be saying it's the goalie's fault for dropping the ball, etc. And everybody's pointing the fingers. And if you imagine the consequences of that for a team, it is that there's relationship breakdown, there's no communication, there's defensiveness, there's no creativity, there's no acknowledgement of what any person could have done differently, because to suggest they could have done something differently suggests they might have been at fault. So a blame approach doesn't work there. And a no blame approach allows everybody to acknowledge what they could have done differently, and everybody to work on trying to improve the situation. So therefore there's kind of an acceptance of each other, there's a safe environment to talk about what they didn't do well, there's an opportunity for creativity and learning, and that's shared, so therefore people feel like they're coming together as a team. There's kind of fulfillment from that because people are seeing how they can move forward. So a no blame approach is very appropriate in situations where there's team underperformance, where there's project failure. Interestingly and challengingly for some, it's appropriate in bullying allegations as well. So that's a feature of, or there are two features of a no blame approach, that they're future focused and they're not trying to find out who is to blame, they're trying to find out what happened when a no blame approach is taken. So finally, for this video, I might do some more on the idea of a no blame approach, because there's actually an enormous amount that could be said about it in terms of how to implement it, what the features are of it, how people communicate within a no blame approach. But just finally for this one, I want to talk about exceptions to a no blame approach. So a blame approach is appropriate in some contexts. It is appropriate where there's been a clear breach of some kind of law or legislation. So for example, in a workplace, a blame approach is appropriate when harassment has occurred, because harassment is a legally defined misconduct, and so you can find evidence of who did it, prove it to be so, and then a subsequent punishment or sanction is applied. Similarly, for other gross misconduct, for gross negligence, for violence, for example, all of those situations would be appropriate for a blame approach, because if there wasn't a blame focused approach, it actually would not be fulfilling a duty of care to protect employees against those kinds of, I suppose, abuses you could describe them as. So sometimes there's a concern when people talk about taking a no blame approach that it means it's going to cover everything, and it's actually one of the reasons why I'm a little uneasy with the idea of a no blame culture, because sometimes when people hear the idea that there's a no blame culture, it suggests to them that actually everything is going to be treated no blame. But there are situations where a blame approach is very appropriate, and correctly so, because people have rights to be protected under law. So if someone does do something which is an abuse of some kind, physical or verbal, or discriminatory in some way, and it can be proven to be so, then it's appropriate that a blame approach is taken. The difficulty arises because quite often a blame approach is used even where it's not appropriate. I mean, taking a blame approach in the football analogy I had earlier, so say for example a player on the pitch punched another player. Now that's an immediate red card. There is blame applied to the player who does the punching. It's immediately a red card offence. It's a very clear breach of a rule, and a serious breach of the rule, so therefore it's right and proper that that player goes off the pitch to protect other players, and to say it's not acceptable for that to happen. So that would be, for me, equivalent in a workplace to someone being violent, being discriminatory in a harassing kind of way, subject to the laws, the definition of harassment under the law. Gross negligence, so if someone's actually acting dangerously in a certain way, that's also a risk to their safety and to others. So these are all things where a blame approach is appropriate. But as I say, where a blame approach is used in situations which aren't appropriate, where you can say it's one person who's at fault, like a team underperformance or a project failure, um, uh, then using a blame approach is actually incredibly detrimental. It's not very good use of resources. It's unlikely to come to any kind of clear outcome because it's not something you can evidence and prove because everybody contributes to it. So there's no one person that's responsible for project failure and team underperformance. And so it's much more appropriate, effective, supportive, nurturing, innovative, creative to use a no blame approach. So just finally on that, I said that a bullying allegation is more appropriate for a no blame approach. Now, subject to the caveat that within a bullying allegation there may be something like harassment or violence, which actually in most bullying allegations there isn't. You know, an enormously small proportion, enormously small, that's a silly phrase, a very, very small proportion of bullying allegations do include anything as serious as violence or harassment, in which case they would be dealt with under those categorizations, not under bullying. But in most bullying allegations, there is a subjectivity to it. It's as much one person contributing to another. Now, a lot of people who feel bullied won't perhaps want to hear that, but what I would say to them is I'm almost certain that your experience is that any investigation into your bullying allegation, if it's happened, hasn't got anywhere. And that will be because it's incredibly hard to identify just one person as a bully because the definitions of being a bully are so subjectively interpreted. Just as something like team underperformance and project failure is as well. So therefore, even though it's perhaps difficult for people to hear, a no blame approach is a more effective response to bullying allegations, provided there has been sufficient investigation to establish that no illegality has occurred, like violence or harassment. But harassment is very different to bullying because it's much easier to it's much more clearly defined under law, so therefore it's appropriate to treat that by a blame approach. But bullying isn't defined under law. It has many varied and different definitions and descriptions, all of which, in my experience of looking at many, are ambiguous, subjective, and not much use, to be honest. So yeah, there's a little controversial ending perhaps, but those are the features of a no blame approach, and hopefully it conveys the reasons why it's a much more appropriate way of dealing with a difficult situation, unless of course it is that the difficult situation is a breach of the law or gross misconduct in some way. So let me know your thoughts. As always, please put them in the section below. Contact me if you've got questions about it. I'll probably do more on the no blame approach because there's so much to what constitutes a no blame approach. But for now, that's my kind of initial introduction to it. I hope you found it useful. Let me know what you think. Like, share, subscribe. You know the drill. And hope to see you soon. Bye bye.